Hi guys, Rony here and welcome to today's video. Here I'm going to talk about a topic that's commonly found pretty irritating by road cyclists, and it's the setup of tubeless tires. So over the years I have struggled myself with setting these up, but luckily the technology has improved and my knowledge and know-how about this has also improved. So today I'm going to share you all about this so you can make your life easier and enjoy the benefits of tubeless tires, which arguably are many. Okay, so the first and most important component of the tubeless setup is a wheel with a rim that is tubeless compatible. Nowadays we have two types of these, so either we have regular hooked rims or a straight-walled so-called hookless rim like this zip that I have here. And the reason why these are different is that they're designed to take all of the air pressure without the tube, and also they're designed to seal the air inside. So this is either done via a tubeless tape that's glued onto the rim or snapped in place in some cases, or by using a rim bed that has no spoke holes in it, which is a better option, but it's quite rare still these days. And the rest of it is sealed by a tubeless valve. So these are all very critical components. So I'm going to talk about how to choose and install each of these in order to gain the most amount of reliability in your tubeless setup. Some rims come pre-taped from the factory, like this one, although I find that this is not really the case with all of them. So for example, Envy and Head rims are not pre-taped, you have to pre-tape these yourself. This I think is often the better case, because I find that some brands that do pre-tape their rims, that's just not done in a very high quality, so I need to redo them regularly anyways. This though is a fine example. This is done nicely, as you can see, no bubbles, no tape coming off, and you got good coverage all around. So this is a good example of how it should be done. Regarding tape, there are two things you need to consider. So the first one is the width of the tape, and the second one is the material. So why is width important? Some people might think that it's just chosen in relation to the internal width of the rim, which is more or less the case, but you need to consider that different rims have a different shape of their internal rim channel, just to aid tire installation. Some are deeper and more pronounced, and because of this shape, the width of tape that you actually need is quite a bit wider than the rim itself, because it just sits in that channel, so it creates extra length and distance between the beads. So again, in most cases, the rim tape that's supplied with the rim is done just enough or just in the right way to fit onto that rim, but there are occasions when a manufacturer has a very wide range of rims and just 2 or 3 different widths of tape, and in that case the setup can be a bit problematic. Sometimes the tape is too wide or too narrow, so it's not ideal. That's why I have around 7 or 8 different types of rim tapes in my wardrobe, just to be able to select this and optimize it really to get a good seal, because it's really critical to have a good seal at the tape. Otherwise you just don't have a realistic chance of making the setup work. So the brands that I like to work with regarding material of the tape, so there's this red one, probably my favorite. This comes as a factory option with Envy wheels, and it's really sticky, which is obviously a must. There are plenty of really low quality rim tapes out there that just don't stick to the rim at all, so you want to avoid those. This is a good one. Another good example of this is the tape you get from Mavic. This one is extremely thin as well, which has pros and cons. And there are some more regular options like this Tessa tape that's actually pretty cheap. So the main difference between dedicated tubeless tapes is that these cost around 35 euros or even 40 per roll, which is really expensive if you consider that it's just a piece of tape. And this one is around 7 or 8 euros, so a very wide difference there. The material itself, I mentioned this one is really sticky and pliable. This is important when you need to tape down the internal channel of the rim so that it fits nice and flush. If you have a tape that's too brittle and stiff, something like this, it can work, but not on rims with very deep channels. Then in the process of actually forcing the tape into the internal channel, you can actually break the tape because it doesn't have enough stretchiness into it to cover that distance. So that's one thing you need to keep in mind. For the installation of the tape, obviously you need to fully degrease the rim itself. I use brake cleaner and isopropyl alcohol to do this with a lint-free rag. And you can notice when doing that, particularly on carbon rims, that there's a huge amount of residue from the drilling of the spoke holes. So you really need to be very careful with that, because if you have bad adhesion with the tape, then it's just not going to work and you're going to get air leaks. So that's, I think, everything you need to know about choosing the right rim tape for you. There's one more element to choosing the amount of rim tape that you put on. So normally it's recommended to go with 2 layers for road bike tires, which are generally do recommend. For mountain bike and gravel use, 1 layer is more than enough because the pressures are low. However, you can also tune this in relation to your fit, depending on the rim and tire combo you want to install. So if the fit is too tight or very hard to install, then you can use a very thin tape like this Mavic that I've mentioned. And on the opposite case, if the fit is too loose and you can't inflate the tire, then you can use either a thicker tape or multiple layers of a thinner tape. So a thicker tape, an example for that would be this Tessa, or, well, this isn't the thinnest one either. Or you can just use 1 more layer if the fit is too loose. So this is also an important thing to keep in mind. If you have the tape sorted, the next thing you need to consider is the choice of valves. Again, most manufacturers do supply valves with their tubeless wheels. However, it is common that these aren't really great valves or just not great for that particular application. For example, this is the standard valves and the seal shape of Envy rims, and quite plainly this is rubbish. I've never, for a single time in my lifetime as a mechanic, I've never managed to get this sealed properly for the first time with an Envy rim. So yeah, not ideal. Generally, these older style valves with this block shaped seal, they just don't really work, because even if you start tightening them, it's just not a great fit. This whole thing deforms in an irregular way, and it doesn't matter how much you tighten it, it will just never seal and the air will just blow past it. And I really mean blow past it, because it's not just seeping out, you can actually hear that. So this is just trash. The second commonly used option, and this is a pretty basic style of valve, but it does have this nice conical shape to it. This is much better suited to most rim shapes, and it's much better at sealing, because if you start applying more and more pressure, it will deform evenly into the cavity of the rim, so it usually gives you a good seal. However, even with this, sometimes there are some extra measures that need to be considered, but I'm going to talk about these in a minute. Then we have some fancy aftermarket options with a nice big plump rubber seal, also in the conical shape. These usually work very well. So there's this Chris King style valve recommended. This is a good one. Also this one from Schwalbe. This also works pretty well. Actually, the seal here is removable, so if you start tightening the valve, it just stays in place, so it doesn't deform unevenly, causing leaks. And then finally, I think the outlier with these is this quite special looking valve from Head, and in my experience this is the best OEM fitted tubeless valve. I've never really had any issues with this. You don't even need to tighten it this much. It's designed in a way that it fits extremely well into the specific rim shape of the head rims. So yeah, it's just a great design overall. It works, and it works every time. So big thumbs up for this one. Really thankful to be riding on head wheels because of this feature. So that's the shape of the valves. There are a couple other tricks that I use in case the valve still doesn't seal very well. And some people try to rely on sealant, you know, but I always try to have my setup fully sealed and to have it hold the air at least for a day or so, even without sealant, because that's the best way to get a really robust setup on the road. So there are two tricks that I use basically. The first one is to apply a dot of silicone, sealing silicone around the valve, and then just thread the valve into that so it kind of is glued into place. Tighten it slightly and let it dry. This usually fixes it. Or if you don't want to mess around with it, I sometimes put a strip of Gorilla Tape or duct tape in this section where the valve is, and then pierce it through with the valve, and this is on top of the rim tape itself. And this again enhances the seating properties of the valve in the rim, because this duct tape is soft, so it's the seal of the valve just digs into that and gives you a better seal eventually. The next component that you need to choose, of course, is the tire itself. So for these modern tubeless setups, I really like to use two options. So this is the Michelin Power Cup and the Conti GP 5000 STR. These are my go-to tires for road use. So the reason for that, I've talked about these in previous videos already, but just to sum it up in a concise way. So these are both very fast, puncture resistant, grippy, so good all-round competitive tires. The main difference between these is the porosity. So with Michelin, you really need to use, at least initially, quite a lot of sealant just to get it hold the air nicely. But after that, it settles, it's good to go. And the Conti, well, this is pretty much a full-on tubeless tire, so it doesn't really need that much sealant. So in terms of the ultimate savings in rolling resistance, this might probably be the better option. But still, both of these work fine. They fit pretty easily to a wide variety of rims. I haven't really had any issues with the bead popping off. So yeah, high recommendation for both of these. As I hinted on a couple of seconds ago, most of these setups will need at least a small amount of sealant to work properly. And again, I've tried many different ones throughout the years, but I really stuck with two options. So the first kind of general option is this one from Schwalbe. It's called the Dog Blue, but essentially it's Stan's standard sealant, so it's also fine. It has the exact same properties. So this is nice and thin, so it goes easily around the rim, even if you use a low quantity, so that's good. It's a thin liquid, and it does have a small amount of particles in it, so yeah, it's pretty decent at sealing the holes as well. Lasts a pretty long time and doesn't have any real drawbacks. It's easily available. So yeah, for general use, I like to use this one. Also, if I use tubeless tire inserts in the wheel, then I generally stick to this one, because this you can apply through the valve, which is also a plus. Then if you want a bit more extra protection, then this new Silca Ultimate tubeless sealant is the way to go. This has carbon fiber strands submerged in it, so it's extremely good at sealing, so good for race applications when you want a little sealant but a lot of protection. The downside, of course, it doesn't last very long. It dries up very quickly because there's just very small amount of carrier in it, which quickly evaporates. And then also, because of the sealing properties, you can't put it in through the valve, which is inconvenient in some setups if you have a very tight tire on the rim, or if you have a tire insert in there. But if you put it in with a tire insert and a decent amount of this, then it's basically bulletproof, because it really does seal very well. So yeah, I'm sure there are other sealants out there that are good. They're popping popping up all the time, but unfortunately I can't really test every one of them, but from those I have, these are the ones that I recommend. Now that your tape is installed, the next step is to install the valve. So I'm going to show you this little trick that I do with the duct tape. And just take a small square of it, cut it in a width that can fit into your rim. And just glue it over the valve hole like that. This is pretty soft and pliable, so should help with sealing the rim. Then you take the valve, and install it in the rim like that. In one video about this, I've heard that this little O-ring here is very important, and it's an utter bit of shit. Why? Because you have to seal the rim and the tire in this space, so the valve seals against the rim. This doesn't do anything except keep the valve nut from scratching the outer surface of the rim, because there, ideally, if your seal here is good, there should be no air pressure in this section of the rim, because it's not designed for that. In fact, if you have a big leak and you try to seal this area so the air cannot escape, you can actually damage and delaminate the rim. So whoever said that is an idiot. Actually, some valves even have nuts that specifically allow the air to escape here in case that happens, so you don't damage the rim. I also try to push down on the valve with my fingers, so you can tighten it a bit more. In some cases where the rubber seal is quite a bit stiffer than this, you can also use a blunt tool to push it down even more. But generally, if you have a good fit between the two, then it shouldn't be necessary to tighten the valve all that much. Okay, that's the valve fitted. Now we can go on to fit the tire. Another thing that I commonly hear and see about the installation is that you need to pre-stretch and preheat the tire and so on. And that I also don't find very useful because, well, why? I've never found any rim and tire combination that I couldn't install with a bit of force and proper technique. So I just never do that, and honestly I think it's a waste of time because the tire, well, it's designed to have a bead that's not very stretchy. That's why it's a tubeless tire, so I don't think this really can actually help that much. Make sure to check the orientation, of course, particularly this Conti tire. The orientation is important because of the tread pattern. I like to align the logo with the valve hole just so it looks neater, no particular reason. The first bead should pop in pretty easily. Like that, using just hands. You want to start at the opposite of the valve to get extra slackness in the tire. And what most people do get wrong is that they don't really use the internal channel of the rim where the diameter is the smallest and the fit is the loosest. So you really need to push the tire through its whole circumference inside so that it sits in this deeper area, so you have more room to play around with here. And as you can see, if you do it properly, you don't even need tire levers. And this is a full-on tubeless tire with a hookless rim, so yeah, if you do it properly, then it's easy. If I were to push this out, then it's almost impossible. But good rims have this design again to make the process relatively easy. If not, you can use a pair of sturdy tire levers that can be hooked into the spokes, so you can use 2 or 3 of these when the fit is very tight. I just don't find that to be necessary in most cases, like you've just seen. This is a particularly good example, but normally it goes pretty well. For the initial inflation, I like to use the compressor. Obviously this is the best choice that you have. There are many other fancy pumps that are available with these pressure chambers, etc., but these tend to be pretty expensive. You can buy a good compressor for 300 to 400 euros with all the equipment, and you can use it for the rest of your life for anything, versus that pump which costs 120 to 150 euros, and you can only use it for that, and it's still a pretty low quality pump. So I think that's a no-brainer for me at least. But yeah, this just makes it a whole lot easier. So just try to inflate the tire. Okay, as you could hear from the pops, it's seated nicely for the first try. If it doesn't, and you can't inflate it more because the maximum pressure rating, and it's still not popped in some place, then of course you can lube the beads of the tire with some soapy water or some specific product to that. I find that usually it's not required in most cases. So now we have the tire fitted, dry, that's important. This one I like to leave it for a couple of hours and just check how much it leaks, or if it does even leak. And obviously it's much more practical to find this out before putting the sealant in. So just a quick test, acoustic test should I say, but yeah, this one seems to be fine. If there's something wrong with your valve and your tape, this is when you will find out. And you'll find out because air will be rushing out either at some of the spokes in some cases, but more often than not it's at the valves. So this is why you don't really want to seal this part of the rim, because you will not be able to find out. You'll pressurize the internal cavity of the rim and it will get destroyed. So since this seems to be good, now we leave it for a couple of hours. It's still good then, there's no reason for extra troubleshooting, and we can fit the tire insert and the sealant. Okay, so these steps cover the basic installation and setup of a tubeless tire. However, there are some things you can still do if your setup is a bit more stubborn or it needs some troubleshooting, and these I will discuss in more depth in our Discord group, where you can join in and ask questions regarding all things cycling, and I'll be happy to help you out. Here I will also post daily updates that I don't post anywhere else, and give detailed analysis of the races that I'm going to do. So if you're interested in that, then join with the link that we'll include below. So that's all about tubeless setups for today. Thanks for watching and see you next time.